And we continue with some of those big topics from around the world now with John Laughland, Director of the Forum of Democracy International. John, thanks for joining us here at today's News Talk TNT.
Hi.
Now, most of the news here in the UK is centered around the upcoming election and trying to work out what the future political complexion of the country would look like. But the tensions are increasing off our islands all over the world, and we seem to get dragged into these. Now, let's start with the Netanyahu situation in Israel. He's vowed to continue his war, even though he's been condemned for an airstrike which has killed at least 40 people. What's been the international community's response to this?
I'm interested that you use the word we get dragged into it. I don't see it that way at all. I see us, the British and the other European countries, I'm speaking to you from Paris, as being enthusiastically involved in these conflicts. You've asked me about Israel, but of course we all know also as well about Ukraine. The international reaction to the ICC prosecutors' request for arrest warrants has been catastrophic for Israel. And the revelations also that Israel spied on and bullied the ICC and its prosecutor, which were, as you know, in The Guardian yesterday and the day before, only add to, I think, Israel's isolation. And with it, the moral discredit of those Western countries, Britain, perhaps not necessarily in first place, but certainly in second place after the United States, those countries which have supported Israel. Britain, of course, having been an enthusiastic founder of the ICC 20 years ago, now says that the prosecutor shouldn't have requested these warrants. The Americans obviously never liked the ICC in the first place, so at least their position is a bit more coherent, albeit in a rather diabolical way. But the fact that the European leaders have distanced themselves from this, have supported the ICC and distanced themselves from Israel, is a measure of the isolation of Israel, because those same European governments initially supported it. Ursula von der Leyen went to Tel Aviv on the 13th of October and gave unconditional support to Israel. She met the Israeli president. She didn't say a word about international law. And this is now chickens coming home to roost, because obviously the moral credibility of organizations or groups of countries that initially gave unconditional support without even mentioning international law, the moral credibility of those countries is now in tatters, as is, of course, the moral credibility of Israel, which started off with a certain degree of support, because obviously people sympathized after the terrorist attacks. But I think that has now been squandered.
Netanyahu, the Israeli premier, well, his people have said that the Rafah airstrike that's killed all these civilians was a tragic mishap. How credible is that?
I don't think it's credible at all, because we all know that the attack on Rafah has been in preparation for a long time. We also know that large numbers of people are there because the other parts of Gaza have been bombed. And we also know that in the lead up to this horrible attack, the Israelis were warned. They were told repeatedly, including, by the way, by the Americans, don't go in, don't bomb Rafah. And they did. So it may be technically a mistake in the sense that they perhaps, we don't know. I mean, we assume anyway, until proven the contrary, that they didn't deliberately target a load of people in tents. But the fact is, it's part of an overall operation. And as you know, in parallel to the ICC request for warrants, there is, of course, the case before the International Court of Justice, which is a separate organization, albeit also based in The Hague. And that case, which various countries, started by South Africa, but various countries have joined, most recently, I believe, Mexico, but also Nicaragua, and maybe others. That case alleges genocide. In other words, the intent to kill or destroy in whole or in part a population. Now, obviously, this is a very, very serious accusation, but it is there. It's being taken seriously. A number of countries support it. And of course, the suspicion then, given this case, is that such attacks are not an accident, but instead part of a policy of genocide. Now, we all know the arguments. There are plenty of people in Britain, George Galloway and so on, who make this argument very vehemently. But the fact is, it is being taken seriously. And that's why I say that not only Israel's moral credibility, but also that of the West, which supports it, is very, very severely damaged, if not destroyed, I would say, by these events.
Another war that you mentioned is the Ukraine situation, where Zelensky is now appearing to want the West to force Vladimir Putin, the Russian premier, to negotiate some kind of a peace. What's he going on about now?
Well, not really. No, no. There's no peace initiative from the Ukrainian side. On the contrary, the Ukrainian side and the NATO countries which are arming it and supporting it and indeed egging it on, they are not talking about peace. They are talking about war. They've quite specifically ruled out peace negotiations because their war aim is to drive the Russians back out of Ukraine, including Crimea. There is a peace summit, but it's not. That's a joke. I mean, it's not the right name. Zelensky spends his entire time. He was in Belgium and Spain only the other day, asking for more and more weaponry. So no, there is no. By contrast, the Russians have said again they would be happy to talk, but of course they want to talk from a position of strength and a position of occupying a large part of Ukrainian territory. So no, the Western policy, and indeed this was very clear. I did a tweet about this. Josep Borrell, the EU High Representative for Foreign Policy, deplored the attack on the Rafah refugee camp and said we are seeking a two-state solution with our Arab partners. In other words, we're looking for peace, a peaceful solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And then in the same tweet, he said there was the attack on what was ostensibly a DIY supermarket in Kharkov in Ukraine, and he said we are seeking ways to help Ukraine. In other words, where Israel attacks Rafah, Borrell talks peace, but where Russia attacks Kharkov, Borrell talks war.
The contradictions seem to be stark for anybody, even with a basic interest in the situation, to be able to understand. The other aspect of this, it seems, John, is an increasing recognition that even in the mainstream media that Zelensky probably can't win. It looks like a money pit for the West. Everyone knows there has to be a negotiation in the end. How much longer can this charade continue?
Well, I'm glad you used the word charade because I've said since the very early days of the war, early weeks certainly, back in 2022, that Russia would prevail and that Ukraine cannot win, or rather NATO cannot win, because it's a NATO war of which Ukraine is the proxy and the theater. So how long can it continue? I really don't know the answer to that. I see plenty of commentators, including ones I respect, predicting the imminent end of the Ukrainian war. In other words, the capitulation of Ukraine. But I would be, I think, foolish to say when it's going to happen. On the other hand, there are signs that it may be imminent. Two things come to mind. One was an interview that Zelensky gave to Sky about a week ago, and he said, we have 25% of what we need. All right. Now, he's been rattling the begging bowl now for 2 years. And if he's only got 25% of what he needs, that is a long way short of enough, obviously. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that makes me think that the end might be imminent was a statement also just over a week ago by the Czech president, Pavel, who is a former NATO general. He's now become the president of the Czech Republic, but his career is he's a military officer. And in other words, he's a totally NATO person. He's not a dissident like in Slovakia or Hungary. Mm-hmm. He said it would be naive to think that we can get the Russians out of Ukraine. We need to stop the war. And that statement made about 10 days ago on, I think, Friday, the 17th of May, was the first time that I'm aware of where a mainstream establishment European political figure has said this. And that suggests to me that perhaps there is a sense that reality is dawning. On the other hand, Emmanuel Macron was in Germany, has been in, I think he's still there. He's like other countries saying we need to authorize the Ukrainians to strike inside Russia. So in other words, he's proposing escalation. And the Dutch defense minister said, I think yesterday, that so 28th of May, that there should be troops should be sent into NATO. Dutch troops should be sent into Ukraine, just as of course Macron said that 3 or 4 weeks ago. So there are mixed messages. There are mixed messages. I would add, by the way, there's one other factor which I think is important, and that is that Zelensky's term ended on the 20th of May. He was elected on the 20th of May 2019, and because of martial law, they've decided not to hold elections. Well, he is now an illegal president. He doesn't have a mandate. The Ukrainian constitution provides for a situation of vacancy in the presidency, and in such a situation, which is, in my view, the one that currently exists, it should be the Speaker of the Parliament who exercises the functions of the head of state. So Zelensky is also on borrowed time himself, and you know, we don't know what the opinion polls, what the level of opinion is in Ukraine itself. That, of course, is an unknown factor, but that could also play a role.
Connected to this, and finally, I understand Kosovo is now to be an associate member of NATO. Is this
Yes.
NATO expansionism? What's the logic for this?
Well, again, I tweeted about that. I said that NATO is now opening a second front, and then I put in brackets, but is it a third front after Israel and a fourth front after, you know, the Red Sea? It is incredible. It is incredible to me that I mean, that's what you started off actually, Lembit, with your questioning. You said that out beyond Britain, the world is becoming increasingly unstable. Yes, it is, and everywhere we see NATO continuing to push. And that's why I say that, you know, we are fully involved. We're not being dragged in. We are, on the contrary, we, NATO, we, the collective West, are pushing. And, you know, you'd have thought that with Kosovo, goodness me, you'd have thought this was time to let sleeping dogs lie. It's 25 years since the Kosovo War, which didn't resolve anything except that Kosovo has been occupied by NATO for a generation. And here we are, yes, pushing further and further the integration of this province, as you say, into the political structures of NATO. So I see a policy of tension, of escalation being pursued by the West, absolutely remorselessly. And above all, I don't see the West having the political, economic, or military means to follow up its own policies. Because I haven't said this yet, so it's the last question, but I think that militarily we're losing in Ukraine as well, or Ukraine is losing with NATO help.
John Laughland, thanks very much for your candidness, John, in Paris.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your candidness. And we're going to stick with the question of geopolitics in a moment with Youssef Al-Alou, who will be talking about the current situation in Israel and apparent threats to the International Criminal Court. All of that with me, Lembit, Öpik, here on TNT. See you in a moment.